This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Oh, Cody. We all miss you. By the way, I'm calling this right now. When Cody comes back from injury next year, guaranteed he returns with Brandy. Guaranteed. And if he doesn't, you can all admonish me in the comments section, but it's just too good of an opportunity to pass on. So, what's up? Hopefully we're all doing well. I'm just peachy as always. I know you can always tell that by my vibe during these podcasts. Getting ready to review some great pro wrestling shows today. And by that, I mean mostly good with the usual exceptions. This was a much better episode of SmackDown that I watched over the weekend, especially compared to last week. Retro Raw was also a boatload of fun like normal. It's actually kind of fascinating going back and watching Retro Raw shows from when the business was in total shambles. And even when you compare one of the worst periods in wrestling with what's going on today, God, Raw used to feel like such a big deal back then. Like, even when you knew the show was a total shite show, they were still pumping it up like can't miss TV. Nowadays, Raw is just a boring 3-hour trudge, and SmackDown is not a bad wrestling show, but has nowhere near the level of excitement that Raw did back in the 90s. Crazy stuff, man. And we're going to talk about it all on today's show. Of course, we are here on Mondays and Fridays each week on YouTube and Rumble. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you smash the subscribe button up there or down there. Wherever the button is on YouTube anymore, I don't even know. I'm old enough to remember when the subscribe button used to be a big old gold button. God, YouTube. I miss the old format. I miss the star rating system. That was one of the worst decisions they ever made, was getting rid of that to put the like-dislike buttons on the replacement. And now you can't even see how many videos get the dislike function. Now it's just how many people like a video, and then there's a dislike function. You don't even get to see the numbers. Thanks for that one, Joe. And what was I talking about? Oh yeah, plugs. Well, you can also help out the show in the algorithms by liking the show and leaving a comment to share your insight on either or both shows we review today. For all you 90s buffs out there that watched the golden era of Monday Night Raw back in the day, love to hear your thoughts on what we cover here. We're going to start with that before we get into the SmackDown review, so let's just dive right into it. This would be the September 20th, 1993 episode of WWF Monday Night Raw. And we open this week with a pretty fun little highlight reel of last week's WWF Tag Team title showdown between the Steiners and the Quebecers. For those that didn't see my review of last week's Retro Raw, go back to check out that segment. It was actually a pretty good tag match, despite the wacky Quebec province rules. And they showed a good chunk of the match here from start to finish, of course playing up the key notable spots in the match. And that was done to set up the featured match for the show. It is Scott Steiner going one-on-one with Carl Ouellet. And if Steiner wins, they get their title rematch with the Quebecers. I presume that match being regulated under normal tag rules. So we go right into it, being welcomed to the show by Vince McMahon, Macho Man, and the under-the-weather, sniffly Bobby Heenan. Keep that in mind for later on. It's It's also great going back and being able to watch Scotty in singles competition. You know, I know it's easy to remember how great Rick and Scott were as a tag team back in the day, but do not ever undervalue how phenomenal those two used to be as single stars. That was before Scotty went on the juice and managed to blow himself up in 2 minutes. Scott actually broke out a front chancery submission at one point in this match. I don't think I've ever seen Scott do that at any other point in his career, but here on this random episode of Raw from 1993, Scott just decided, you know what, I'm going to break out a front chancery. Why not? It hit me early on in this match that it has been a couple weeks since we've quoted any of Bobby Heenan's one-liners on this show. Here he had a pretty great line, wherein Vince McMahon was bringing up how this match was a good old-fashioned New York-style match, as opposed to the Quebec Province Rules match from the previous week. So Heenan at one point goes, so if this is New York rules, does that mean we'll see run-ins from winos, bums, and muggers? And of course, Vince was not having any of that. Meanwhile, in the year 2022, boy does that statement ever ring true. Seriously, fuck New York, dude. No offense to anyone that lives in that godforsaken cesspool of a state, but you can do better. They had a pretty great angle here right before they cut the break. Obviously, you had Johnny Polo out there with Pierre trying to run amok and cheat for him. And when they come back from break, you see Scott in the ring with the hockey stick, while the rest of the Quebecers are all filing out from the back. And as soon as Jacques gets on the apron to tease that he's about to do a run-in, out comes Rick to even things up. Well, kinda. It was still 3-on-2 with the heel advantage, but I guess technically Johnny Polo would probably count as 2.5 people. But all that distraction allowed for Pierre to finally get the advantage over Scott to work him over for the first time in the match. There was also a point here where apparently Bobby Heenan was just blatantly sneezing all over Vince McMahon at the desk. And of course, this was back when wrestling was great. So during the most boring part of the match, where Pierre is laying on the mat with Scott in a chinlock, Bobby Heenan, ever the genius he was, begins diving into a tangent about being able to soak up all of Pierre's sweat, put it into a bottle, and call it Pierre water. And if you don't get the pun, look it up. Also made better by him immediately retorting to Macho Man's joke about Doink throwing water on him last week, to which Heenan says, no, that was typical New York sewer water. You know, I'm going out on a limb here, but I'm starting to gather the vibe that Bobby Heenan really did not like New York all that much. He was not even trying to hide it. So they eventually built to Scott's comeback at the end, right before a spot where Scott tried to roll out of the way from a Vader bomb, and Pierre still made contact with him anyway. Whoops. And finally, Scott hit a really rough-looking Frankensteiner off the ropes to secure the 3 count, so that presumably set up the big title rematch. Or so we were led to believe at the time. Which means that this will be the 3rd week in a row where I'll probably have to listen to the Mounties WWF theme music. The pain. The agony. That was followed with a Bam Bam Bigelow squash, wherein the first move from the 400-pound monster was, of all things, a standing dropkick. With ease. He also took the flare bump over the top rope into the corner onto the apron at one point. All of this for a completely pointless 5-minute squash wherein Bam Bam was not even the central talking point. Because this segment was all about the follow-up to the Crush Randy Savage story from last week. If you'll recall, there was a phone conversation they had with Crush and the rest of the commentary team, and Crush was sort of giving everyone a health update after he had been taken out by Yokozuna weeks back. But when they got to the Macho Man part of the discussion, Crush didn't seem to want to partake in any conversation with him. They played it up as technical difficulties. So this week, they tried to have a phone call with him again to see if Savage could get Crush to respond to him. And he got a response this week. The response from Crush was, "Macho Man, I'm going to say this once, brother. I don't ever want to speak to you again for as long as I live. Got it?" And he hung up. And everyone was confused. A brilliant, well-done angle. It was serious. Everyone sounded very authentic in their delivery. And the confusion surrounding Crush and Savage's relationship continues. Continued for a while, actually. Oh yeah, and there was also a match going on at the same time. I wrote almost nothing down about it, except for the finish where there was an obvious camera edit in the spot where Bam Bam was trying to hoist up the job guy for a standing fisherman suplex. And after dropping him to the mat, he hit a running senton splash off the ropes for the 3. And that immediately segued into them showing the replay of the incident last week with Doink and Bobby Heenan, the real reason why the Brain had the sniffles on Raw this week. Because for those that did not see last week's show, there were 2 big angles that took place. We had the Quebecers winning the WWF tag titles in the opener, and we had the ending to the show where Doink swerved Bobby Heenan and threw cold water onto his face, thus turning babyface in the process. Doink, that is, not Bobby Heenan. So they showed the angle again, and it was still pretty great, admittedly so. Even though if they tried the same thing in 2022, it would have probably gotten over like a fart in church. But Bobby Heenan could get that shit over any day of the week. God rest his soul. What a legend. And by far, the best part of the whole exchange is when they cut back to the booth to show Heenan sitting with a thermometer in his mouth. He's blowing his nose and talking about running a 113-degree temperature. And Macho Man leans over to Vince and casually goes, "Tell you what, there's one thing that could never be recycled is Bobby Heenan's tissues." Slow clap for the Macho Man. But now it's time to get super serious. It is interview time with Bret I Take Myself Too Seriously, the Hitman Hart. I kid. Kinda. So this was mostly centered around recapping everything that went down in the Jerry Lawler-Bret Hart feud from SummerSlam. They showed all the still images of everything that happened at the pay-per-view, including Doink being introduced as Lawler's court jester, which was ironic because now that Doink is essentially a babyface on this show, Vince made sure not to explicitly name-drop Doink the Clown at any point. But he posed the question to Bret of how he rectifies everything that happened at the pay-per-view now that Lawler is officially recognized as the undisputed king of the WWF. And this is actually a pretty good promo from Bret, all things considered. Bret was never someone I ever considered a great promo, especially when he was a babyface. He had some pretty good heel promos a few years later when he was doing the whole Team Canada thing after the Steve Austin match, but I always thought he was kind of wooden, bland in his delivery on the microphone as a babyface, but he got his point across here. Said that his only regret coming out of that match is that he didn't apply the sharpshooter longer, and the day's going to come when Lawler has to step back in the ring with Bret to do it again. Only next time, after Bret gets through with him, he won't have a head to wear his precious little crown on. And, well, it only took about 2 years to get there, but they eventually got back to the Bret Lawler one-on-one match with one of the dumbest fucking stipulations of all time. But, yeah, this was solid enough for what it was designed to do. That took us to another Mr. Perfect Squash, which was almost a carbon copy of last week's segment. He beat up a guy in a few minutes, won with the Perfect Plex. All the while, the fans split between chants for Hennig, and the other half chanted for Shawn Michaels. And Hennig was trying desperately not to get visibly pissed about it. But let's talk about the real highlight of the show this week. This is another case of something that was so good, I had to just go ahead and record the audio and play it for you in full because I don't think my commentary on this can do it justice. So without any lead-in or segue, I present to you Ludwig Borga complaining about Americans being terrible environmentalists. In the year 1993.
Look at this garbage. Look at this filth, this pollution, the paska, roska. I, Ludwig Borga, is gonna tell you Americans what's really going on here. This filth, you call this the land of milk and honey? Well, down here, it stinks funny. And Lex Luger, you are proud of this? You stand up for all this filth, this pollution? This used to be a nice, beautiful river until you Americans started to clean your house. And right here, we can see what Americans are all about. Filth, pollution, corruption. And Lex Luger, if you stand up for all this, that makes you only one thing, a garbage driver. And America, it stinks down here. American stinks. Lex Luger stinks. So Americans choke on this.
You call this the land of milk and honey. Well, down here, it stinks funny. That alone, that right there automatically makes this the greatest promo of the entire decade of the 90s. That was so atrociously bad, it deserves applause. I also love that his comeback line to Lex Luger is calling him a garbage driver. Of all insults. Them's real fighting words, Mr. Borga. I imagine Luger will have a thing or two to say about that. No, seriously, this is fantastic. This 2-minute clip right here made this show an all-time classic. Ludwig Borga, man. The guy was terrible, but his entire gimmick was so memorable for all the wrong reasons. Speaking of great Raw moments and Bobby Heenan just being the fucking spirit animal of all of us longtime wrestling fans, only the brain can make a final segment like what I'm about to talk about work. So we come back from break, and we cut to Heenan standing by a couple in the front row, and he goes to ask the guy's name. Of course, his full name is totally incomprehensible, so Heenan's retort line is to ask him, "Are you in this country illegally?" And no shame, point blank, the guy just responds, "Yeah." And they just move on. So clearly nothing's changed in our country when it comes to border control all these years later. Port authorities probably took one look at that and said, fuck it, who cares? There's already hundreds of them running around New York as we speak anyway. Cut the guy some slack. And obviously, this was a setup so the guy could propose to his fiancée on live TV, all the while Bobby Heenan is just being Bobby Heenan. He tells the guy to get on one knee, all the while he hands the girl his used tissue and then chomps on some popcorn. And, well, for one, she was totally embarrassed and did not let the guy kiss him on live camera. So all signs point to that marriage ending in horrible tragedy a few years later, like most marriages do. And for the record, she was probably no more than a 5 on the hotness scale, but that's just my personal take. And that was kind of it. Trainwreck television that only Bobby the Brain Heenan could make great because he was so goddamn funny. And our main event was IRS versus PJ Walker. They wrestled for about a minute. Commentary team made some snide remarks about the proposal skit a few minutes prior. And then Razor came down through the aisleway to distract Rotunda so Walker could roll him up for a schoolboy to pin him. And it also hit me at this point who the most over guy on this entire show was. Razor fucking Ramon. God, that guy was over like wildfire. Amazing. So, yeah, that was pretty much that whole segment. And we had a quick promo in the back where Heenan interviewed the Quebecers, asking if they were going to grant the Steiner brothers a title rematch, even though we literally just saw Scott beat Pierre in the opening match to earn that title rematch for his team, as per the stipulations. However, silly of me to forget that the Quebecers were heels. And you know what heels do in pro wrestling? They lie. So Johnny Polo says that even though Scott beat one half of the champs completely clean, there are still plenty of other worthy challengers in the WWF that should get a title shot first, including names such as, not making this up, the Head Shrinkers and Men on a Mission. Howled with laughter. Therefore, they will not defend their belts against the Steiners next week, and they all scoffed and laughed at everyone for thinking they'd actually live up to their word. We all got duped. But we are going to have a tag team title defense regardless. We just don't know who the opponents are yet. In addition, we are also going to get to see the TV debut of Ludwig Borga, as well as a one-night appearance from the Superfly, Jimmy Snuka. Boy, that didn't age well, did it? Am I even permitted to say that name out loud? Or is that forbidden language in wrestling like the name Chris Benoit? Well, I apologize if anyone's triggered by my mere mention of the name, but, well, you can't erase all of history. I also believe this was their last set of Raw tapings from the Manhattan Center for a while. Can't remember where they said they were going to be live from next week. Somewhere in Connecticut, I believe. But, yeah, that's kind of an important historical note. You know, obviously they would revisit the Manhattan Center for later dates, but this did not become their homestay for their filming location at any point after this episode. They were going on the road. And this is where you'll start to see a better taste of live crowds from the various cities they visited. Some of the fans were hot, others not so much. But there you have it for the Retro Raw show this week. Overall fun show. Bobby Heenan once again the sole highlight, no question. Sucks he's only around for a short while after this before he ended up leaving the WWF at the end of the year for WCW by early 94. We'll cover that in greater detail as we approach it, but drink the brain in while you can, because he ain't around that much longer. So that'll segue us right into WWE SmackDown. September 16th, 2022, for those keeping track at home. And we got Pyro this week. Right on. Moving up in the world is WWE. Of course, I'm kidding. No, I've known WWE has been doing Pyro for a while now. So this was our second week diving into the depths of modern WWE television. And, well, I'll say this. I've read the reports on how atrocious this television product has been in recent memory. I especially remember people harping on how bad the whole Scandemic era was for this company, which didn't seem exclusive to WWE because AEW was pretty much dog shit during that whole time period as well. But I'll say this. If this is the kind of TV product that we can expect under this new regime as the norm, I'll take it. It's not a perfect show by any stretch, but it's easily more watchable most weeks than Dynamite is. I did not have the urge to reach for the fast forward button during this show, which is a good thing for a change. Although the main event this week really kind of pushed it for me. And for the record, there were some things that I actively skipped over on last week's show. That was mostly due in large part to the girls' content. Thankfully, that was all kept to a minimum this week. And now people will fire the misogynist comments at me. Whatever. But, boy, what an oddball start to the show this week. They opened with Logan Paul, who, last I remember seeing him, he was the biggest babyface on the SummerSlam card, going up against the ultimate heat magnet, The Miz. And apparently sometime between late July and mid-September, so 2.5 months essentially, Logan Paul is now one of the biggest heels in the company, all because of the apparent fallout with what went down this past week on his podcast. The story is that Logan had Roman Reigns on his show this week, and they supposedly had a very cordial conversation together, right up until the point the camera shut off and Roman left, where Logan had sent out some nasty tweets, basically calling out Roman to a fight behind his back like a coward. And surprisingly, this did not sit well with the crowd in attendance because they were all calling bullshit on the whole deal. He got about 2 sentences into his promo before the people started wutting him, which is always a bad sign when you're apparently trying to get yourself over as a babyface, which I think is what Logan Paul was trying to do here. His basic premise was he's hosting a press conference the following day where he is inviting Roman to meet him so they can chat, and maybe, perhaps, Logan may or may not issue a challenge to Roman for the Universal title. So that brought out another big surprise, and it was a big surprise. The return of Paul Heyman in a checker pattern suit. Perhaps not the most fitting choice of a suit pattern, especially for the way Paulie is looking these days. And he had the rest of the Bloodline with him, minus Roman, of course. And, well, it's been a while since I've seen Paul Heyman cut a long-winded promo. Most of the time, I just watch him come out with Roman, do his usual ring intros, and then stand there ringside looking like a plump garden gnome. But here, he did some actual verbal jousting with Logan Paul, and it pretty much went over as you would expect a Paul Heyman-Logan Paul face-off to go. You know, Paul Heyman's obviously been doing this for years, so he was naturally great in his delivery, and Logan Paul was unnatural, nervous-sounding, and came nowhere close to matching Heyman on the microphone in any way, shape, or form. Basically just standing there limp-dicked while Heyman wiped the ring mat with him. Hence why the people continued to sour on Logan the more and more the segment continued. And they eventually got to the big angle where Logan teased knocking out Heyman, but Solo Sikoa got in the ring apron to tease a standoff with Logan. And of course, the last thing they need to be doing right now is laying out Sikoa like a job guy. So they made the right call of having Sami Zayn take the bullet here and get knocked on his ass with a right hand from Logan Paul. And I take it this was supposed to get a babyface pop from the crowd. If I said this was an epic failure, that is probably still giving too much credit. The people saw Logan deck Sami with a right hand. Some of them booed. The rest of them sat on their hands and didn't react at all. And then finally, it led to the Bloodline trying to go after Logan, but he rolled out of the ring and backed up the ramp, wherein this somehow spawned Ricochet to show up from out of the blue for his scheduled match with Sami Zayn after the break. This is a very weird segment. I mean, I don't need to tell you how badly the character dynamics are already fucked up in this entire program. It's obvious they want Logan Paul to be the babyface in this, and, well, suffice it to say, that ain't fucking happening. And I guess I should just ask up front, because maybe someone can fill me in with the details. I mean, I literally just started watching the show last week again. Did Logan Paul do something off camera where the people turned on him? Maybe I'm just totally forgetting history here, but this guy was one of the most highly cheered babyfaces on that entire SummerSlam card a couple months ago, right? What the hell happened between then and now where now he's getting booed going up against Roman Reigns of all people? Who, last I checked, was also still a heel, along with the entire Bloodline. Is it just no one actually buys that Logan Paul is going to beat Roman for the title, hence they don't want to see Logan challenge for the title anyway? I mean, I guess I can understand it in that sense, but yeah, like I said, if this was all designed to get people to cheer for Logan Paul, mission failed. Abort, abort, and abort. Back to square one with this program. So coming back, we had Sami Zayn versus Ricochet, with Logan Paul and the Bloodline still at ringside. Even though we literally just saw the Bloodline try to attack Logan 3-on-1 right before the commercial, they come back from break. They're all just hanging out. No problem. No one's going after the other. I guess cooler heads prevailed. Am I the only one that thought that was the dumbest shit? So, I guess this would be the part of my review where I talk about my thoughts on Ricochet, seeing as how I don't believe we reviewed a Ricochet match in quite a while on this channel. To tell you the truth, actually, I never really had much of an opinion on him, even going back to NXT. He's another guy that can do a million flips and cool-looking stunts, and it's not to say that I haven't seen a handful of good Ricochet matches, because I've enjoyed some of his stuff. Would I say I've ever been a fan of his or advocated that he ever get a monster push at any point? No, not particularly. I always just kind of saw him as a serviceable mid-carder, but nothing more, really. To tell you the truth, I'm actually surprised he's still working for the WWE with all the roster cuts they've been going through in the last couple years. I mean, it was a fun little TV match. Overbooked all to hell, and I'm not entirely sure why they needed all the run-in interference at the end for a Sami Zayn Ricochet singles match with no build. You know, obviously both guys know what they're doing, so even if I wouldn't consider myself a fan of Ricochet's ring style, it was fine for what it was. I'm not really sure if they needed to break out all the WrestleMania falls finishes, you know, especially as an opening match on TV, but yeah, the crowd was into it, so I guess it worked. Heyman was by far the highlight of the segment. There's a spot where Ricochet blocked one of Sammy's moves, and Heyman, in reacting to this, ended up dumping over Michael Cole's drink at the commentary desk, which Cole mocked him for. That may or may have not been a shoot, I really don't know. They had a deal where Logan distracted the ref to cost Sammy a visible 3 count, which did not go over well with the Anaheim crowd. Even though he had seen the Usos run interference on behalf of Sammy moments prior, and when Logan tried to return the favor, people shat all over that. And fast forward to the end, this is another angle they established here, and it actually played into an overarching story for later on in the show. They alluded to this a little bit last week, where apparently Sammy and Jey Uso weren't seeing eye to eye for some reason. And there's a spot at the end here where Jey gets knocked off the apron by Ricochet, and when he tries to slide into the ring, the ref gets distracted with that, and it ends up costing Sammy another 3 count on Ricochet. Which, by the way, side note here, this is not effective booking if you're trying to get Ricochet over as a babyface. Booking multiple angles in a match where the heels are getting visual pins on your babyface. Bad call. Regardless, Sammy gets pissed about this and starts getting into a verbal spout with Jey on the floor. And that allowed for Ricochet to take advantage, hit everyone with a senton dive out onto the floor, with Sammy jumping the gun, looking over his shoulder to see when Ricochet was taking off for the dive. Then he threw Sammy back in the ring, hit him with a shooting star press for the 3. Like I said, fine match. Way too overbooked, but they're advancing some story angles, and the Bloodline thing played into something that happened later on in the show. And afterwards, they had Madcap Moss run out with a chair to align with Ricochet and Logan Paul. Apparently, that was their way of hyping up Madcap Moss versus Solo Sikoa for later on. So we have established here that Logan Paul's friend group now consists of Ricochet, an underneath babyface who hasn't been jack shit in forever, and Madcap Moss, whose biggest claim to fame is being pushed as a lackey for boring Corbin on the main roster. I think I'm starting to see why the crowd is not getting behind Logan Paul. His friends are lousy. After that, we had this pretty cool little Karrion Kross Scarlett video pre-tape to recap what happened last week with Drew McIntyre. Really didn't write a whole lot down about the actual segment, although it made me remember how talented Karrion Kross was at portraying a badass wild-eyed killer. And to think Vince never picked up on the guy's talent. Or Scarlett, for that matter. Very interesting. Then we had a segment that I was fixing to shit on as soon as it began. And even though I can't say it ended on a hot note, it ended a whole hell of a lot better than it started. So they come back from break, and who should be standing in the ring but my main man, Eli Drake. And whoever the Maxine valet chick is. But they have totally castrated my poor boy Eli Drake. One of the most gifted and talented talkers in wrestling in the last 10 years. And here he is on live national television for a major wrestling company, role-playing in this facade called the Maximum Male Models. All because Vince probably wanted to fuck with the guy. In a million years, if you asked me how WWE would have booked Eli Drake if they ever got a hold of him, never would I have thought this is what his career would have resorted to. Nevertheless, sad reality, here we are. And he was here to introduce us to Billy and Chuck 2.0, now being played by the role of Marseille and Mansoir in suspect schoolgirl outfits. And I literally had my finger on the fast forward button here, getting ready to jump ahead when, thank God, out came the monster among men so that these schmucks could get these hands. And, well, this was going about as well as you could hope for. Braun Strowman comes out. He football tackles both geeks from behind and leaves them for dead. Ended up throwing the one guy in the ring so he could kill him with a powerbomb. Eli Drake, I have no idea where he went. Apparently he was just sucked into a vortex, never to be seen again. And had they cut the segment right there, this probably would have been perfect, actually. Unfortunately, they hit Chad Gable and Otis's music, and, well, then we got the second half. Because they had Gable run a distraction from the ramp so that Otis could sneak attack Strowman from behind. They tried to do the 2-on-1 beatdown, but Strowman kept fending them off. And the crowd stayed with this right up until the point where Otis hit Strowman with the world's strongest slam. And as soon as Strowman popped back up, they totally lost the crowd. It was actually like clockwork. Like, Otis hit the guy with the power slam, and then immediately Strowman got to his feet. Bam, the people turned on it. And I don't know if that came from Strowman no-selling the power slam, or if the people just didn't want to see Strowman get bumped, which kind of leaning in that direction. That was a big mistake to have Strowman get dropped on his back in any capacity right now. That guy should not be taking bumps at any stage where he is right now, no matter who he's going up against. Like, no, you save that for a later date when he's going up against someone with actual heat that the people take seriously. Then you might have something, because then there's drama there. I mean, I like the idea here. I get what they were going for, but the problem was the crowd wasn't having any of that last minute of the segment. Now, they set up Strowman versus Otis out of this, which, if they're smart, they'll course correct here by having Strowman go over and smash both guys in under a minute. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening, which will be a damn shame. Again, and I think I talked about this a little bit, but Braun Strowman needs to be protected at all costs right now. He should be WWE's modern-day Andre, where you have him smash dudes every week, no-sell everything, and wait to get heat on him until you have the right opponent at the right place at the right time to do it with. Having him take a front power slam from Otis here on a random TV episode, that didn't do him any favors, and the crowd response reflected that. So I didn't like that at all. Then we had this Damage Control segment. Damage Control being the official name for Bayley, Dakota Kai, and Io Shirai's new faction. Damage Control, huh? Maybe it'll grow on me. Anyhow, they're also apparently the new women's tag team champions after having beaten former champs Raquel Gonzalez and Aaliyah on Raw this past week. Probably a good call because, Aaliyah. But Bayley did most of the talking here, and she's still a Dynamite promo. She definitely got healed more here than she did in Wales a couple weeks back. She actually had a great line in here where she was talking about the fact that Damage Control has something that nobody in Anaheim can relate to because they suck. And that line alone probably doesn't sound all that funny on the surface, but you have to listen to Bayley's delivery of it. Like, you could tell it was totally off the cuff, and it was so underhanded and slimy. It was perfect. But this eventually cued Raquel Gonzalez or Raquel Rodriguez, Raquel Sanchez, whatever Hispanic last name she's going by these days. She comes out, and by cracky, she looked like a normal, pissed-off mean girl this week. Didn't look like someone was holding a pistol to her head, forcing her to smile. And she was very cut and dry here. Said all she sees in the ring are three bullies that need to be taught a lesson right here, right now. Subsequently led right into the women's match that actually ended up being all right. Also helped that it featured two women that actually have some talent and skill. Bayley's awesome. I've been a big fan of hers going back to the NXT run years ago. And like I noted a minute ago, Raquel Gonzalez had a lot going for her in NXT when she was a heel and she was steamrolling through the roster every week. Then, of course, they sent her up to the main roster, changed her name, dyed her hair, and made her smile like a hostage victim every week. But they had a perfectly fine TV match. Raquel dominated early on, threw Bayley around like a rag doll for a little bit. Heels ended up running interference for Bayley so she could cut off Raquel in the corner to get the heat on her. Worked over her leg for a brief period. And they had Raquel work a nice little comeback, muscled up Bayley into a power slam, which spawned Io and Dakota to try and hit the ring again. Raquel ended up powering Dakota into the ring to set her on top of Bayley so she could hit the Vader bomb on both of them. And while the ref was distracted trying to roll Dakota's dead carcass out of the ring, Io got in the apron, raked Raquel's eyes so Bayley could hit her with a front-face DDT for the 3. Good match. The run-in stuff wasn't entirely distracting like it was in the opener. Although the idea of Raquel pulling Dakota into the ring while the ref is looking right at it, probably could have done without that spot, but that's just nitpicky. The whole Shotzi thing at the end really didn't do a whole lot for me personally. I never liked Shotzi that much to begin with. I always thought she was kind of overhyped in NXT. The whole green hair and tats, the giant tank. God, let us never forget the tank. Not my flavor, brother. Plus, I never thought she was all that great of a worker to begin with. Like, her shit always kind of looks sloppy and indie to me. But I guess they're going to be doing her and Raquel as a tag team going up against Damage Control. I don't know what the deal is with Aaliyah. They kept saying they put her on the shelf. She didn't come out here with Raquel at any point, so maybe she's actually injured. Hence why they sent out Shotzi at the end to make the save. But Now we'll see where it goes. And they pretty much immediately went into the follow-up girls segment with Ronda Rousey and Liv Morgan in the back. They had Ronda prep for a sit-down. But as we all know in modern wrestling, sit-down interviews, those usually don't end up going according to plan. This one saw Liv Morgan come in to sit across from Ronda to try and act all tough and courageous. Meanwhile, I'm still sitting there laughing the whole time because she looks like a 13-year-old middle school girl talking to a grown woman, and her promo was faker than a Miami boob job. Just sitting there reciting a bunch of scripted verbiage as wooden as humanly possible, trying to sound intimidating. Nah. I didn't buy this. You know, Ronda was good in her delivery because she actually sounded authentic. I couldn't get into Liv stuff. It's just, visually the whole thing is ridiculous to me. Now, if Ronda were going after Shayna Baszler, we might have something here. But the Liv Morgan thing, no. Sorry, not feeling it, Mr. Krabs. Didn't really have a whole lot else to note about that. So that segued into a quick Drew McIntyre promo from the announce desk. And his whole deal was coming out to call out Karrion Kross to let him know he has his attention now. And the only counting Kross needs to worry about is the 3, 2, 1, lights out. Very short, very simple, got the point across. And if the match is happening at Extreme Rules, which I imagine it is, I am interested to see if they try to throw a stipulation into it right from the jump, or if they just run with it as a regular singles match. I can't imagine this is going to be like a one-and-done feud, so I don't know. I'm captivated. You know, they actually might play well into a circumstance here where doing the match for free on TV once before the pay-per-view without a clean finish, that would actually work, so you could book some kind of stipulation match for the Extreme Rules show. Like an actual case where doing the match on TV first would make sense, because you can book a non-finish and then give people an excuse to want to see the real finish at the pay-per-view. Then we went into this Solo Sikoa match, apparently for the North American Championship, which, according to the video replay they showed, he literally just won this past Tuesday on NXT. So maybe that official call-up wasn't as official as I thought it was. Anyway, he defended the belt here against Madcap Moss, who I've noticed has seen a significant push decrease since they canned Vince. I'm old enough to remember when Madcap and Baron Corbin were all over those premium live event shows earlier this year, but guess Hunter's not on the same Madcap bandwagon as Vince was. By the way, this is where they also shot the follow-up angle with the Bloodline in the back, because they're all hanging out by the entrance curtain, and you had the Usos trying to come out with Sikoa, but he held Jay back and told him he doesn't have his head on straight right now, so he doesn't need him. But he does ask if Sammy would be interested in joining him. And of course, Sammy with that scumbag look on his face, he's smiling and rubbing his hands together while Jey Uso's just staring a hole through him like, you dumb son of a bitch. That was actually really well done. I like that little angle. Another good showcase piece for Sikoa. I talked about it a little bit last week, how I really hadn't been paying all that close attention to his development in NXT over the last year, but from what I've seen, he's a natural on camera. His shit looks good. He lays everything in. His timing is on point. He doesn't rush into his spots. That guy's going to be a big deal in WWE whenever he gets more ring exposure. The match probably went a little long for my liking. I think this probably would have better served as like an in-and-out procedure kind of match. And you have Solo go in there, kill the guy in a couple minutes, and leave pretty much unscathed. Like, no offense to Madcap, but I mean, seriously, does he really matter at the end of the day? At least on the card right now. You know, this should have been a quicker squash for Sikoa so they can keep establishing him. You know, having him go through long periods of selling and barely escaping with the belt at the end because of the Sammy interference. Not what I would have done. It worked with a guy like Drew McIntyre because of where he is on the card, but Madcap fucking Moss, dude. No. Unacceptable. But Sikoa won after catching Madcap with a super kick and then following up with a modified rock bottom. Really nothing to note beyond that. I don't know if the American or the North American title is going to be a mainstay on the main roster or if Sikoa is going to spend a little more time down in NXT. I don't know. It's weird. Like, they literally just called him up and then they decided to put a developmental title on him. I don't know. Guess we'll see where they go with it. But then we come to the main event. A 4-way number 1 contenders match for the tag belts. The match is Hit Row versus The New Day versus Imperium versus Ridge Holland and Butch from the Brawling Brutes. God, where to start? Well, I'll start with my first bullet point I wrote down. Fuck The New Day. I have nothing else to add to that statement. It's been 8 years. Please, for the love of God, let that putrid tag team go away forever. Along with the theme music. And have Xavier take his trombone and pancakes with him. Now I'll go to my second bullet point. Can we please hire a fucking agent for a major wrestling promotion that teaches guys how to throw realistic-looking punches? If I see one more guy throw a fake windmill punch on a live television show ever again, I'm going to urinate on my television screen. Seriously, every single one of these slapsticks that does the windmill punch should be fined, neutered, and suspended. In that order. Okay, I think I'm done. I'll get off my soapbox now. So remember when I said that the main event was the closest point in the show where I had my hand on the skip function? Well, I almost did. I was about a half second away from it, but decided against it since we only had about 5 minutes left in the show anyway. I mean, I probably wouldn't have missed much in the first place. Look, all joking aside, I'm not going to spend too long talking about it. If you're into the whole crash dummy move spectacle, everyone does a million things and packs in as much bullshit as they can into a short window, more power to you. I've seen enough of these multi-man car wrecks to last a lifetime, whether I'm watching it here in WWE or AEW. Doesn't matter what the company is. Every one of these matches is the exact same thing every time. There's no psychology to it. There's no ebb and flow. It's just everyone hits dives and moves nonstop for 15 plus minutes, and more often than not, there's a flat finish. And all of that pretty much rang true here, including the flat finish. You know, I already said my piece about the New Day, but regardless, in my opinion, they were the most over team in this whole match, bar none. These WWE fans love them some booty-shaking, cereal-eating, trombone-playing, pancake-flipping, video game-loving New Day. Guess we all have preferences. You know, the other teams were just kind of along for the ride here. Hit Row are all greener than goose shit, so they still all need a lot of work. Still kind of wondering why they're on the main roster right now and not in NXT when it's obvious they need more ring work and probably shouldn't be getting this kind of exposure on mainstream television every week. Although I will concede, Top Dollar being able to carry around 3 grown men like he did here, very impressive. Imperium, I already kind of touched on them last week. Good athletes, fine workers, but I've always kind of viewed them as Walter's goons. You know, most of the time I've ever seen him in NXT, they were either getting punked out in matches or taking falls on behalf of Walter. So it's kind of hard for me to see them in any different light right now. And the Brawling Brutes, who ended up going over here, I mean, as much as I loved Sheamus's match with Walter from the UK show, Pete Dunne and Ridge Holland just kind of seemed like another set of flunkies for Sheamus. You know, Pete Dunne's always been a good athlete, and I've seen a handful of great matches from him when he was booked seriously, but the whole Butch rebranding, God, that's so death. And all it did was kind of make him out to be a comedy character, which under the Vince regime, maybe that was what they were going for. All in all, it doesn't really sit right with me. You know, of course, they stole every WWE multi-man finish here where a team hits their finisher and then the other guy runs in and dumps the other one out of the ring so he can steal the pin. It's exactly what Ridge Holland did here at the end when Imperium hit Kofi with their double team move. I mean, the Brutes going over was an interesting choice. Crowd didn't really take too kindly to it, but Christ almighty, if they would have put the New Day over here, I would have chucked my TV out the goddamn window. So the last thing I need to be seeing is more New Day Usos matches. But could make for an interesting program. I can't imagine the Brutes actually end up going over the Usos to win the belts, but it's at least a new set of babyface challengers to go up against the Usos. Better than the New Day. Or the Street Profits, who I did also take note, they were lacking from this match, despite them getting into a brawl with the Usos on last week's show. But it's all kind of a wait-and-see deal right now. Not my cup of tea as far as a wrestling match goes, but, you know, if you like chaotic spectacles, you'll probably enjoy this one. Overall, though, nice, solid job. You know, the show wasn't blowaway or anything like that, but they had some fine wrestling content on this week. It didn't feel like I had to strain to get through the full 2 hours, and that's a massive uptick. It's still not enough to justify me trying to go the full 3-hour gamut on Monday nights, but they packed a lot of stuff in here, and they followed up really well with a lot of the leftover material from last week, too. You know, it's one thing WWE is actually really good at, is explaining and following up on stories and angles from the previous week. You know, whether it's explaining them during ring intros, replay packages, addressing them in promo segments, they're always very effective at that. You know, sometimes they hammer things home a little too much, but I'm okay with that. Especially this day and age where nothing is ever explained properly on the other channel. So, with that said, that'll take us to another wrap-up here for the FSWR channel this week. This coming Friday, we should be back to the normal schedule with the Dynamite and the Retro reviews. At this point, still don't have any further updates or insight on the whole CM Punk Elite drama. Most of that I'll probably just save until we actually have some clarity on what the hell's going on with that whole charade. You've all heard my in-depth thoughts on it now for a couple weeks, so I'm not going to go into it again here. If you're one of those fans out there that are trying to follow this stuff closely, you know, feel free to share. Let me know what you've thought about this whole ordeal. Things have really erupted in the last few weeks with AEW, and it's kind of hard to tell whether all this publicity is going to work well in their favor in the end, but it is the most notoriety they've gotten all year. And I still stand by my statement that I said last week. It's probably AEW's biggest story to date. It's been very quiet from a public setting, but there are going to be a lot of stories circulating between now and whenever this whole investigation gets resolved. Quite frankly, I'm still not even entirely sure what there is to investigate, much less why it's taken so long to get everyone's story. You know, probably lets you know that there's a more elaborate story than what we're led to believe at the moment. I mean, I have my suspicions, but we will save that discussion for another time. Until Friday, take care all. Peace out.